Greetings, blessed ones of the Omnissiah. It's Scuffy. What's up? How's it going? We're here. We're back for the card by card for the Mechanicum Part 2. We just don't stop. We're gonna keep going, and then we'll do Part 3 and move on. Like I got card by cards to do, and I got so much time, so I got to get them squeezed in. So when we last left off, we were talking about the card by card for the Mechanicum. We did the Warlords, and we did cards up to cost 2. Today in part 2, we're going to be doing Mechanicum cards cost 3 through 6, and part 3 of the card by card for the faction will be 7 through 10. And that is because these neutral factions are just so thick. They're just mammoth, man. I mean, they're big. Your average actual faction is about half as big as a neutral faction, and the neutrals are neutrals. So there's a lot to talk about as far as different stuff that they can go in, as opposed to just a single faction deck. So that's why we're doing 3 parts. We did 3 parts for the Imperial Army. We're doing 3 parts for Mechanicum. We're going to do 3 parts for Chaos, and then we'll be done. Right? Just in time, I'm sure, for some more cards to be added to the mix. But let's get into it. Let's talk about the card by card. Mechanicum, starting off with the energy cost 3, Alpha Zeta 70, 54 protectors. It's okay. It's okay. It's a 2-3. Honestly, I mean, it's a 2-3 for 3. That's not great. But if they survive for 1 energy, you're getting +0/+2. And then they get frontline. So this is not something that your opponent wants to let sit, because it's going to become a beefy frontline. It's a 2-5. Then it's a 2-7. Every turn for 1 energy. It doesn't increase its attack at all. But as we talked about, and we'll continue to talk about with the Mechanicum card pool, there's various ways to buff your Mechanicum troops, especially infantry, with Mechanites. So there's a lot of synergy that can actually make these guys 5/7s very quickly if you're throwing down like a Las Taul or a Mechandrite or something like that. Now, one thing to note with them is that they are cost 3. Right, they're cost 3. That's very important to note, because Tagmata formation allows you to put in Mechanicum troops that cost 3 or less. It's kind of like the Mechanicum's version of Ornithop Barge. The problem with that is none of those units actually have front line, but one of those units can gain front line. And if you happen to generate a couple of these guys, one of them sticks, you've got some protection. That seems like, that's a lot of like what ifs, but when you play Mechanicum builds that are using Tagmata formation, you're also using it in conjunction with Death of Innocence, which gives all of your Mechanicum troops marks of chaos. And sometimes you might have 2 Death of Innocence. So when you play Tagmata, not only are you putting in multiple troops, each one of them are getting 2 marks of chaos, which increases their survivability and lethality a lot. So this is not a bad card. I wouldn't put it in my deck. That being said, if it's generated or if it's in an event draft packet, great, but I'm not hunting this card out. It's okay. It's okay, but it's not great. Now, Asteroid Belt. This is great. This isn't to go in every deck. There's a fine line with it. But basically, it raises your energy by 1. That's a permanent. If you are at 10 energy, or if it kicks you to 10 energy, you draw a card. Early game, playing this at 3 energy is fantastic. Playing this on curve, especially if you have high initiative and you're going first, puts you further ahead on the energy spectrum of your opponent. If you don't, it puts you up to where your opponent is at. You kind of are even tier. You combine this with maybe warlords that have already got some cost reduction abilities, such as Saul Tarvitz in the Emperor's Children. He can lower the cost of things, so not only are you can play an Asteroid Sanctuary turn 1. So starting turn 2, you've got 4 energy. With his ability, you're bringing in things that cost 5. Or you could use it with cards that start with more energy in the pool, like Colonel Ornitov and Thaddeus Fail, as well as the sometimes neglected Questoris Orlok. which starts with 1 energy more as well. So it's a very good card. It doesn't go in every deck, but decks that either A, want that energy boost because they plan on playing a lot of cards at 5 or higher, want to get there faster. And then sometimes you just got, you just want that. You're already kind of geared for it. If you already got the energy advantage, keep it up. A while back, people were running Fail, who would then run Asteroid Sanctuary, and then Desolated Ground, and then, the old Desperate Defense builds. You guys remember those? You could still do that. You could still do Desolated Ground and Asteroid Sanctuary with Fail, and then play high-cost cards, and your opponent's at like 3 energy, and you're at 6 or 7. Wow, that's fun. But the problem is Drill Site has been changed, and Desperate Defense no longer does what it does. It does a watered-down version of it, so you actually have to, build a better deck and play a little bit smarter. That's not crapping on this card. This card is very good. If you see this in the shop, I recommend picking up at least one of these. This is worth having in a variety of decks. I run this in most of my Death Guard because Death Guard have got really solid stuff starting at 5+. So I'd like to get there faster if I can. I run this in some Wombo combo stuff. It's a little bit more like I used to be my old like Mimi Alpha Legion deck. But typically, if I'm running a deck that has got like a lot of high, for me, I'll kind of just show you. I mean, I try to find a deck that's decent of it. I gotta go into decks, don't I? This is totally deviating, but I feel like with Asteroid Sanctuary, you want to have a fine line. You want to be able to see. I'll just use the Mortog, the Morog, Psi Alpha. If I'm seeing a majority of my cards here, I've got 13, I've got 16 cards, I've got more than half my cards above 4, I feel like Asteroid Sanctuary, Asteroids Belt is a given. If I've got that many, I want 2 because I want to get there faster. If you've got, let's say, 10 above 4 cost, maybe 1 Asteroid Belt, you're kind of in that borderline. 8 and above, depending on what you've got, 1 is good. But if the majority of your deck is below 4 energy, or maybe you've got like 2 or 3 cards at 7 or 8 energy, Asteroids Belt isn't the fit for that deck. You really have to take a look at your deck composition to get an idea. Is this the deck? Is Asteroid Sanctuary the right call for this deck? But you just kind of get a feel for it. It's a really good card to help those decks out. It's also a really good card for decks that like to stay and play ahead of curve. There's a playstyle for that. And as I said, I recommend you pick up at least 1, just to have that tool in your toolbox if you ever want to go to it. Very nice. Asteroids Belt with the Alpha Legion counterattack. Playing this on turn 1 basically gives you the same advantage. And then turn 2, you can follow it up with higher cost cards because you're at 4 energy. You can play Pale Spear and all that fun stuff. It's pretty cool. Chai Epsilon. Not much to talk about with this guy. Big stat and attack. Weak little stat in health. No game text. He's a pass for me. It's going to be a pass for me, dog. But as I said, with the same with Alpha Zeta, you can generate these guys with Tugmata, and that's really where you see them, is where they get mass generated. And then in that regard, then they could potentially have 2 marks of chaos. And that could be a little scary, especially if they've got like a mark of Nurgle and the mark of Tzeentch, and then they've got, an additional 3 health. So keep that in mind. Dark Engine's here. You don't see this guy enough, but I kind of like him. I like what he does. I like his stats. His stats are actually fairly well for common. Your next Chaos card this turn costs 2 less. This doesn't synergize a lot with Mechanicum, but if you're running a Chaos-heavy deck, he actually synergizes really well. The problem is he's got to survive. 4 health is decent. You might keep him alive for 1 turn, but it's not great. I actually run him in Ingethel because I have a lot more Chaos cards in my Ingethel deck, and he's a great way to reduce them and bring out maybe a Father Decay at 7 energy. But I also then can buff his stats with her Marks of Chaos and various other stuff that's in the deck. So that works well if you're building a cultist deck or you're building a deck that uses a lot of higher cost chaos stuff. But you want to find a way to protect this guy. I wouldn't bank on it, but if you have him as a tool, it's nice. Now, this is a newer card that has been added, and I like this card a lot. Dark Tech Adept. It took me a while to get a couple copies of this. But this has got Resolution, create a Chaos Mechandrite in your hand. So it's important to note, he's just getting the Chaos Mechandrite. None of the other Mechandrites. Usually, various cards that create Mechandrites create a random Mechandrite. He is just creating the Chaos Mechandrite, which gives a Mark of Chaos to Infantry or Astartes. So, and that's as a resolution. So you play this guy, and then you're guaranteed to get just the Chaos Mechandrite, which you can then use on your following turns or later in the game. He actually he feels like a watered down version of Alpha Theta. We'll get to Alpha Theta here in a second because he's 2/3. He only makes one type of Mechandrite, but he comes out a turn earlier, and his resolution is a smidge better than Relentless. I mean, when I say smidge, I mean it's significantly better. Survivability low, but again, if you are able to protect him or increase his health, he can get up there, and there's a lot of ways to increase health. And I'm not just talking with Mechanicum stuff. I mean, this is a neutral card. This can go in anything that increases the stats of your troops very easily. This is actually a really nice new card that was added in the recent expansion. So if you can, try picking up one of them and have fun with it. Epsilon Alpha 63. Not a fan of the stats on this. The 1/5 at 3, 1 attack is not great. 5 health is nice. The ability is cool if you can make it work. Because typically at that point you have to either play him first, and then you play a vehicle or structure, and then your opponent's got 2 turns to remove him before you actually use his ability. Or you've played the vehicle or structure, and then you play him, and then your opponent's got 2 turns to either remove the vehicle or structure or remove him, so you don't really get to use this ability a whole lot, is what I'm trying to say. There's been a couple games where, like in Draft, he is part of a variety of packs. I think in a couple Imperial Fist decks, I've made him work and heal structures fully, but not often, and that's usually because he's got, the stalwart defenders on him. So, not something I would rely on, but that 5 health is really nice to base off of after you have gotten the Death of Innocence, and maybe 2 Death of Innocence, and then maybe Tagmata formation. Again, just the same as we've got a 5/1. What if we've got a 4/7, or something like that? I mean, because Mark Korn, and then Mark Azich or Mark Nurgle. I mean, that's pretty stacky. That's nice. Again, I'm talking about random generation here. I'm not talking about putting this card in your deck. Forbidden Protocols. Oh, this card, baby. It's hot. It's hot to trot. If you're playing vehicles, get this card. This is a legendary not to pass on. It has lost a little bit of steam when they removed the Bloodthirst as one of the random buffs that could be included. But this card is just going to get +1/+1 to a friendly non-vehicle troop, which it can be anything. Or, if it's a vehicle, it can get anywhere between +1/+1 to +3/+3 Marks of Chaos, and then Ward and Survivor. And maybe Flank. I think Flank might be one of the ones that can still gain as well. And it doesn't get Terror. I've never seen Terror. If you've played it and you've gotten Terror, let me know. But I don't think I've ever seen Terror. It's a very powerful buff. It is not shy. Give a powerful random buff. It is powerful and is random. And there are a lot of ways to make that stick with stealth vehicles. And then the next turn you follow up with that, and sometimes you just get a beast of a push. Like I said, as we've gotten rid of the Bloodthirst, they're not as deadly. Sometimes people used to play like Doombringer, and then Doombringer would survive, and then you throw down the Forbidden Protocols, and you get Bloodthirst. Then you've got like an 8/8 minimum with Bloodthirst that also has a resolution deal 2 damage to everything. So it's toned down a bit, but as I said, if you're playing a vehicle deck, White Scars, Emperor's Children have got a lot of vehicles. Mechanicum, Tactus Proctor, If you've got the majority of your stuff as vehicles and you have got a Forbidden Protocol, squeeze that thing in there. You will make use of it. Pi Alpha 52, this is a very utility card. This is one to pick up. You're not going to put this in every deck, but it should go in many decks. It is one of a handful of cards that remove stun, and it is only one of 2 neutral cards that remove stun. Pi Alpha 52 and Wonders of Tizca are the only 2 cards that remove stun from a friendly unit. There are a couple Warlords who do it as well. That's it. That's it. So if stun is a pain for you, or if you're running a Warlord who is really the damage output, Angron, Jagathai Khan, Imperial Knights, where stun shuts you down, then you have to have a way to remove stun. This is one of those options. This is in the very first expansion. You can find this in ISFON 3 crates. But if it's in the shop, I recommend picking 2 up. You won't use them in every deck, but you will use them. Now, I'm heavily emphasizing the remove of stun, but I should also, heal 3 is nice. 3 for 3, so you're healing 3. You get a 2/2 body on the board that you can do a variety of things with, and you remove stun. Now, the important thing to note with a lot of people, sometimes I see, is they just throw down this to heal, and that's great, but if you're playing an opponent who has stun as a tool, don't. Save these guys. Unless you've got 2 in your hand and you're making the backup. I see people make that mistake so many times where they're like, I just got to heal for 3. So they play, and then 2 turns later, I stun them, and they have no stun removal. And I had that stun in my hand the whole time. But once I see this go, great. You have 1 less way to get out of my next stun. And the stun after that. And anything after that. Use your stun removals wisely. If it's anything, this is an educational experience, I hope. Very good card. Not a staple for every deck, but certainly a recommendation for many decks, especially decks where you have got the Warlord that is putting out damage. This is really also handy with Custodes and the recent Custodes buff. Maybe some people are playing Custodes more because, if you stun your Custodes, not only are you not drawing a card, but then that big powerful troop doesn't do anything. Custodes and Demons. Demons have got maintenance. If you're running a lot of them, you might want to have a way to counter your opponent's ability to stun you and shut those demons down. So keep that in mind. Sagittarii Peltas. I like this card. I don't love this card, but I do like this card. For a 3 cost, rally, deal 2 damage, and stun a random enemy with stealth. This is really nice against mono Warlords or Warlords who are in stealth, and they're the only ones who are in stealth, and then you get to stun them. Specifically, Kurz, Conrad Kurz, or Korax. So I think those are really the only 2 that do stealth. There might be a third right now that I'm thinking of, but I can't think of off the top of my head. The point is, Sagittarii Peltas, they're okay. They deal damage and they stun. The problem is they don't break that stealth. So then that stealth troop is still in stealth, and if the stealth is just till the end of turn, great. But if it is a permanent stealth, you're kind of hosed. Because then you've got a 3/3 body sitting out here right for the pickings. But for their stats and for what they do, they're nice. I've got them in a couple Mechanicum decks, but there are better stealth removals. Because while this does damage and stun, it doesn't remove. And really, when it comes to it, you want to remove. You want, Arcadius removes all. You've got Informant Network. You've got Skitarii Protector. You've got various faction stun removals. This just kind of helps you neutralize some of the threat of stun, but it doesn't remove the stun. Shield Generator. This is another card, by the way, that can be generated randomly by the Tagamata formation. I'm not trying to upsell that card. I'm just saying these 3 costs, you look at them, you're like, that's not something I put in my deck. But if you are building a deck that is going to use that card, you could see them. And it's something to see when you generate 2 shield generators off of that. And then all of a sudden, all tactics cost 4 more. I actually put this in a few decks that doesn't run a lot of tactics. It's okay for Tacticate. I think the game got a superior tactic hate machine. It's a once of copy with the legendary Niaro Sukasan, Admiral of the Jovian Fleet, Solar Auxilia on top of that. Enemy tactics cost 2 more. That's so much better, and she's got a 3/4 stat block, and she's Solar Auxilia. Shield generator has a shield, and it has 1/3, and it can attack, and it affects your tactics too. That includes counterattacks. So make sure if you're playing shield generator, if you're going to play it, make sure you play your counterattack before you do, because otherwise that's going to cost you. But yeah, I run this in like Latara Saren just because she's an I run a lot of other anti-tactic stuff in there, learning a Hydra. I think I've got the Edict of Nicaea in there as well. Just for that's the theme of the deck, is to punch out troops and nullify enemy tactics. So that's the idea. This card is susceptible to Ambassador Melgator. It is susceptible to a single Voraxx if you are not protecting it with a frontline troop. So it's not something you just throw out there, unless it's a last-ditch effort and it's like late in the game and you got nothing else. You want to try to play this a little bit smarter if you've got this in your deck naturally. And if you've got this in deck naturally, you should have a little bit more frontline. You should have a little bit more protection for things. It swings games sometimes. I mean, especially if you're facing the right opponent and they have a handful of tactics. They don't want this to survive because they know you don't. And you can play your stuff unimpeded for the most part. So keep that in mind. Sibilance. Sibilance is nice. Sibilance is not great. Way back when. The original Mechanicum card by card somewhere out there, way back in my archives. I was like, oh, this is such a great card because it returns random enemy troops to hand, and you can use a 3/3 and you can kill one troop and bounce the other. And Melgator was an unhinged son of a bitch. That Melgator, he was a hot turkey. God damn it, Melgator. Ambassador Melgator was the fucking bad cop, dude. He was like, he was Mel Gibson in Lethal Weapon, just wrecking cars and not caring. Strange Mel Gibson plug. Tangent. Sibilance, though they're not as good now because there are so many troops that have got good rally effects. So it's hard to bounce something that your opponent is going to use again. So it's still very good. And there are some decks that either A, don't have hard removal and that want to use it, or who can use this a lot better because of other tools that they've got. I like to use it in Fail because he can make this thing flank, which then allows me to use it offensively on the turn I play it, which really negates the way that your opponent can play around it. You can also use it as far as like the backlash. Like you can use a Sibilance with the Word Bearers, and they've got a lot of troops that do like sacrificing their own troops. It's a high energy play, but Ashen Circle and Sibilance for 7 energy. You play that, the Sibilance bounces one troop, Ashen Circle still gets fast and gets to deal with the other troop that might still be on the table. Or if you're not using Ashen Circle, maybe you're just using something that's going to gain like, Ward. Or perhaps it's going to, pump out some Demon Host. The point is, it's got some synergy with the Word Bearers a little bit if you want to abuse that. It's also got synergy in the Knights of Caliban with Mir Astalin, which the faction has got a very high cost, not super effective removal. So for 4 energy, this is a way for Mir Astalin to drop the Sibilance, kill the Sibilance, and then bounce something, as well as deal 3 damage. So you're still dealing 3 damage from the troop. It just costs a little bit, but you're also removing a threat. It's not something you just play out of hand. You want to also hopefully have some energy to play another troop on top of it. But it's a way to make use of Sibilance and still use them without your opponent having the ability to play around it, right? Like if you just play Sibilance and your opponent doesn't have any troops on the board, all they have to do is kill Sibilance before they play their troop. Or if they've got one troop that they can kill, they can just throw it right into Sibilance and it doesn't cost them anything. So you want to play these a little bit smart, but they're okay. They're not as good as they used to be, but they're all right. Svarog 171 is a low-cost vehicle. He's got Relentless, receives 2 damage, though, so he's not a great way. He's a damage Castellix. Not a great way to stick around, because after 2 turns he's taken 4 damage, so even if you're buffing him continuously with Proctor or other things, he's gonna succumb. He's gonna break. But the fact that he's at 3 energy and you're getting a high stat card, that's really what the upsell is. Your opponent has got to do 3 damage to this the turn that you drop it. Otherwise, it sticks around and it's going to deal 4. And usually I run it in Proctor because he can buff him, and then you're getting a 5 at least to attack with on your next turn. You can also use it with Fabius Bile, who could potentially boost this thing and give it significant more health so that it survives even further. You could use it on a couple other things that either heal, maybe, or give it Survivor. Atesh Tarsa is a great way to give this thing Survivor 1. So even after it attacks, it's got 1 health and Survivor 1. Your opponent still has to deal with it. Otherwise, that its resolution or Relentless is just going to bring it to Survivor 1, and you can keep the cycle going. It's a little high maintenance. I like to say that you can use it in combination with Epsilon Alpha 63, but as we talked about with Epsilon Alpha 63, it's not really reliable. He does what he does, and then he goes away. Now, another vehicle that is something that your opponent does not want to let sit is Ercerex. This is one that is 2/4, starts out relatively low key, but every turn it's got 2 energy to give itself +1/+1 and connect again. So if you drop this at 3 energy, at 4 energy, you can just make this a 4/6. And then the next turn, it's you've got 4 more energy to do it 2 more times, and so on and so forth. And that's not if you're buffing it with other things. The fact that it can act again means after it's buffed itself, it can attack. This is actually a pretty nice vehicle for a variety of builds, but specifically builds that like to have vehicles, that like to have buffs, that like to have reduced cost vehicles, or different things. I'm just going to Proctor because I'm in the Mechanicum the thing here, but I mean, I see them in a variety of decks sometimes pop up because they're not a troop that you can ignore. They're something that, I mean, if you let this be, it's going to get real strong, especially late game. If your opponent plays a couple troops and they throw down one of these, and I know that they have 10 energy to give this basically +5/+5, especially if it's in the Salamanders and they've got the Promethean gift and they can reduce that cost by 1. They've used this before. It comes out, or maybe right the turn that they play that. And then all of a sudden they've got that Ercerex that has got, or Ercerex. The Ercerex is a different thing. That now can do this for free, or can do this for 1 energy. So it's something to be feared. If you see it stick, don't let it stick. War Room. With all the cost changes to cost reduction, War Room took a little bit of a hit. I didn't really play it as much as I played Supply Lines or Abandoned Supplies, so I didn't really feel it as much. It has a place in some decks still, but it's very, very finite. You're better off playing a Command Bridge for 2 energy to get you just the tactic you want. You're not getting a cost reduction, but you're getting that card, versus drawing a tactic and it costs 1 less. For 3, it just doesn't feel as good. And like I said, it's very niche. It could have a spot in some decks, but it's definitely lost some steam with the reduction, and that's for the best. Quite frankly, that's for the best with the game. Advanced Schematics sucks. I love the art. I love the art for this, but the card itself is not great. Reduce the cost of all Mechanicum troops in your deck by 1. That's it. Doesn't draw you a card. Doesn't do anything else. At 4 energy, that is not when you want to have something like that go off. You're not getting anything out of it back. It doesn't reduce the cost of your Mechanicum troops that you have in your hand, just in your deck. So this is not a good card. Do not put this card in your deck. Just don't. Alpha Theta 11. I like this guy. This guy goes way back when. The original Tech Priest. Relentless create a Mechanic in your hand. He's a 3/4. He has got the ability to basically pump out a bunch of Mechanites if he sticks, or he's like, give him a shield, give him survivor, put him in stealth, whatever the case may be. He can become a monster or give you the tools to make other things monsters. He's not something to ignore, and as such, typically it's hard for him to survive without something like Last Towel buffing his stats, or some frontline protection, or one of the other ways of keeping him alive. But when he does, oh, those Mechanites, I mean, the worst Mechandrite you can get arguably gives him more health. And I say arguably because some could argue that offensive Mechandrite isn't great either, but I disagree because, as I mentioned in the previous video when we talked about the Mechandrites, throwing down 2 or 3 of those, giving a guy cleave 6, cleave 8 is pretty nice. So Alpha Theta 11, very nice, but you have to be building a deck to kind of make use of him. Eventually, as your collection gets bigger, like if you get him as a neutral, that's great. He's a decent troop. As your collection gets bigger, I think you'll find generally in the factions, they've got better cards or faction-specific 4-cost troops that they would rather run than Alpha Theta 11. But if you're running an infantry-heavy deck, or especially a Mechanicum-heavy deck, for me, he always feels like a go-to. I always just throw him in there. If I'm going to go, hey, I'm going to do Mechanicum Ingathel, or I'm going to do Mechanicum, whatever flavor I want to do Mechanicum with. Let's say I'm going to do Mechanicum Alpha Legion. Doesn't make sense, but I can do that. I can do it. I can do Mechanicum Thousand Suns, too. You can't stop me. But then Alpha Theta's going in, because he is a very solid Mechanicum troop. Cycloraph. Create 2 random Imperial Army vehicles in your hand that cost 1 less. It's okay. It's okay. It creates, let's take a look at the vehicles that it can create, right? Most of them are high cost. A couple of them are low cost and not great, or like mediocre, I guess you could say. Philesian Airborne is okay. I mean, it's got stealth, which is nice. But then you've also got, where is it? You got this Dracosan Transport, this kind of clunker. Not something I'd want costing 1 less. I really, if I'm going to play that and hope to get vehicles, I want to get either the Mortar Carrier or the Lernia Hydra. But I could also get Malkador's Tank or Zerial's Storm. I could also get now Hell's Fury, which I don't really want to begin with, and Stormhammer, which isn't bad. So it's okay, but if you're banking on putting those in your hand and not playing a troop that can do something at 4 energy, then you kind of have built your deck for that reason. I'd rather play something else at 4 energy. I'd rather play a troop at 4 energy with typically most factions. Delta Omega 42, nice starter card for a lot of folks. Rally deals 2 damage. It's a 4/2, so as far as the body goes, it's probably not going to stick around to do its 4 attack, or if it does, it's just going to draw like a flank or have your opponent throw a surviving troop into it to get rid of it. But the rally deal 2 damage is nice. This actually is an okay card for some decks that like to do a lot of splash damage. Mandragorax can use these guys in conjunction with her ability at 6 energy. She deals 2 damage randomly, and then she throws down this guy, or you can use him with Ferrith Redloss, Zardu Layak. Anybody who's got splash damage is nice, or anybody who just likes to burn. This is not just consigned to troops. This is just 2 damage. This can work very easily on your enemy warlord. Epsilon Row 32. These guys are just solid. Not fantastic, not terrible, just solid 3/4 frontline for 4 energy. If you ever find yourself in any deck where you're like, I need frontline, I need some low-cost frontline, I need some average frontline protection, typically you go to a couple cards, right? You go to the Tried and True Syrian 12th Regiment, 2/3 for frontline. Okay, that's not bad. Maybe I go with Ornitov's Barge, because it's going to give me some random frontline. You might go with 45th Section now, because that's a nice new card for 5. And maybe you could throw in the Ogren, right? You're like, Fjorst Ogrens. Those guys will always be good for frontline. or you go to the staple, the Epsilon Row 34, which is a good, nice 4 energy cost. They're kind of that in between. You've got a 2, you've got a 4, you've got a 5, and a 6. And there's not much to say. It's again, it's a solid, it's a reliable choice. It's a common. You should get these fairly quickly. You should have access to these. It's just a matter of whether or not you choose to use them. Laz-Taul. This is a great troop for Mechanicum. And I say that because it's pretty basic. It's a 5/4, so it cannot be bounced with Melgator. On top of that, all your other friendly Mechanicum troops have +1/+1. And what's to say about that? If you're running a Mechanicum heavy deck, you put it in Laz-Taul. If you want to run a Mechanicum heavy deck and you don't have Laz-Taul, be sure to pick him up in the shop. He makes everything stronger. And if you throw down a second Laz-Taul, he gets stronger too. They share their strength. And maybe you have Sagittarii Axiarchs. Now he's made a Sagittarii Axiarch a 3/3. And the Sagittarii Axiarch has made him a 6/4. Because they're friends. That's what friends do. It's synergy. That's what it's called, baby. It's synergy. M3 Castellix. This is not the damaged version of the Castellix. This is a 4/5 that attacks by itself at the start of its turn. That is the downside, that it attacks by itself at the start of its turn, because it means you can't take advantage of increasing its stats and then attacking with it. You can't really 100% guarantee where it's going to attack. Typically, you know where the AI should attack, but your opponent can also exploit that. Or they can just throw up a frontline troop and they don't take the brunt of this. It is a low-cost vehicle, so it is a vehicle that you can get out relatively quickly to put pressure on your opponent. And there are some decks that can take advantage of that run a lot of low-cost things, or run a hand dump. It's nice for Proctor just because he can, give it buffs and keep it alive a little bit, and your opponent knows that they're going to get hit by this thing. But I don't like attacks by itself. I just don't. I personally do not like attacks by itself. It's not bad. It's not great. It's a fair trade-off for what you're getting for this card. But like, this card is not something that I can then play Laz-Taul and then make it a 5/6 before it attacks, because it's going to attack before I get a chance to do anything else. Sagittarii Squad. I love Sagittarii Squad. That's these guys. They're infantry. So first off, they can get Mechanics on them. That's nice. They're a 3/3. That's okay. They've got resolution, deal 2 damage to a random enemy, and that's really where they come into work. If I have got a warlord that's got frontline, I act in crews. Any of the frontline warlords or the Imperial Army warlords who can generate frontline troops, I feel like Sagittarii Squad is one of the squads that I like to put in, just because I can protect them better, and then they can pepper my opponent. And my opponent has got to decide, do I spend resources whittling down this frontline warlord, or do I try to deal with the stuff that he's protecting? And I can't ignore these things. Now, late game, they're very vulnerable with 3 health, but if you're able to buff them through that late game by playing other cards, or maybe increasing their stats, or maybe you've played multiple other troops, so now your opponent has to choose, do I deal with the Sagittarii Squad, do I deal with the Doombringer, which is the bigger threat? At that point, it gets a little bit harder, but if you play them at 4, at 5, even at 6, and protect them, your opponent is going to get frustrated. This little pings for 2 add up. Just ask the Imperial Fists, ask Kemba Diaz. Time Meltabong. This is a card that gets played, but it doesn't get played as often as it used to. It still works very well in decks that can make it work offensively the turn it comes in. Specifically, Thaddeus Fail, who can give this thing flank, making this a 7 energy, 4 damage to all enemies. That's pretty nice. I'll take it. You can also use it with the Night Lords. The Night Lords love this card. It is an old trick. It is an old trick with the Night Lords, but if they've got their Recon Claw, boom, at 5 energy, I drop that Time Meltabong, and everything on my opponent's side is taking 4 damage. The problem is the Recon Claw has to survive to make that happen, but it's entirely possible. It can be done. It is curious to note, just for people who aren't aware, this is a structure. It's just a Time Meltabong, which would fit in basically, your hand. You could carry it like a little lunchbox, but it's a structure. So it is vulnerable to crack grenade. It is, gosh, I kind of wish terraforming would let you create 2 structures, not just Imperial Army structures, and then put them in your hand. Because then if you could use Imperial terraforming to terraform 2-time Meltabombs, you could really take advantage of that with those decks. That would be kind of fun. But as I said, it's kind of seen its days. There's a lot of that just don't use it. You could actually use it with oh gosh, I'm trying to think. There's like one more warlord that gives flank, isn't there? Or maybe I'm thinking a tactic. There's a tactic that gives flank. So if you've got a way to give it flank, it gets better. It can be a little bit costlier, but if you save it in your hand for the right time, it's a nice surprise play. But it's not something to include in your deck if you can't do that. I really don't think. Voraxx is a good flanker. This is a good neutral flanker. If you don't have access to flanking or a good flanker, pick this one up. Again, just like Asteroid Belt, it's not something you're going to have in every deck. But the decks that you want to put it in, it's very useful. This is typically going to remove 2 troops. It might just remove 1 troop if it's got a higher attack value. But just the same, having the ability to flank is nice. Having a vehicle that can flank and flank twice is very nice. These guys used to be 3/4s. They did a little bit more punch, but they scaled them down to 3/3s. They're still very nice. They still do the job, but that 1 extra health sometimes makes a big difference. So, as I said, if you're on the fence about it, I'd recommend picking up at least 1. Zargas Kane. We talked a little bit about his lore in the last video, the part 1 video. Zargas Kane is he's basically the loyalist who leads the Martians, basically in their exodus from Mars to Terra. He takes up the title of General Fabricator Locum. I'm surprised he wasn't a warlord. He got the troop treatment here. Maybe we'll get a warlord version of him, because this is just him as an adept. He heavily transforms himself, massively so, where basically he becomes a fucking tank. A tank with a head. But that kind of goes hand in hand with his ability here. He gets +1/+1 when targeted with a Mechanic, and just like the Merit's Mercenaries and the Imperial Army faction, that strategy with the with Caliber Hal and dropping a bunch of Mechanites, we kind of talked about that with Caliber Hall. You can make this guy a monster. If you've got these Chaos Mechanites from Dark Tech Adept, you can throw down Zargas Kane, play a couple of those, and then he gets Marks of Chaos as well as his +1/+1s, and he can just juice up really hard. Juice! Yeah, that's where it's at. So yeah, he's in a deck if you're running a lot of Mechanites or Mechandrite creation. If you're not going to include him. Is he worth getting? Maybe. Is that something you want to do? If it is, yes. If not, then you can sleep on him. That's okay. Death of Innocence. So I've talked about this card a little bit already this video, as far as the Death of Innocence build. It is not exclusive to Mechanicum, but it obviously, by the text of this here, gives your Warlord Marks of Chaos to Mechanicum troops you put in play. If you're not playing a lot of Mechanicum troops, or the majority Mechanicum troops in your deck, don't play Death of Innocence. This is not a good card for you. This is not a card to put in that deck. But if the majority of your deck is indeed Mechanicum, and maybe you got a Warlord like Ingathel, who is doing a Mechanicum Ingathel, Death of Innocence, so she can give a Mark of Chaos, and then everything she puts in play gets a Mark of Chaos, and then she has 2 of these. You're giving up a lot of momentum at that 5 energy mark, but quite frankly, in a lot of games, that makes up for it when you play multiple troops and suddenly they get Marks of Chaos, or they get multiple Marks of Chaos. That makes up a lot of energy. The problem is the state of the game. doesn't really allow too much error on that. So, I mean, if you play Death of Innocence and you don't have a good follow-up, you will not recover. You want to be able to decide, is this a game where I can play Death of Innocence and get away with it? Or is this a game where Death of Innocence is just not going to do anything for me? But when you play Death of Innocence, like I said, you play Tagmata formation. Oh, that's fun. Especially if you get like 5 or 6 troops and they all get Marks of Chaos. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So it's an okay card for a very specific deck. This is the deck type for that deck. It is a Death of Innocence deck. It's not a Mechanicum deck anymore. It's a Death of Innocence deck. So if that's what you're going for, great. That's an auto-include for that deck. But this isn't just something that you passively put into any other deck. Delta Omega 03 stuns enemies damaged in combat, which is cool. It's just whether they're attacking it or it's attacking them. As long as it damages them, it will stun them. The problem is its stats are not great. It's a 3/5. It's nice that there's a lot of different cards that can increase these stats. Okay, to 4/6 or maybe a 5/7 if you're lucky to get it above that Melgator. But for 5 cost, the stats hurt. The ability is great, but the stats just always kind of draw you back away from wanting to play with it. And I think at 5, there are better choices, especially when you're talking about neutrals that are going to go in any deck. A lot of people don't make use of Delta Omega 3. Early on, when he was one of the few Mechanicum troops, it wasn't a bad ability at all. It was okay, but there are some very good 5-cost troops that are much better than this to put in your deck that may not stun, but they do the right job. Auxilia, it's a 5/5 body. The +2/+0 and heal 3 to a friendly vehicle for 1 energy is significantly better than Epsilon Alpha 63. Absolutely doesn't do anything with the structure, but he's increasing the attack and he's healing it. That's nice. And with 5 health and 5 attack, he might actually survive longer. But it still comes down to that timing. It still comes down to the timing of how you play him and how you play a vehicle. And will they survive in order for you to be able to actually use the ability? That's not something I put in my deck. I might see him pop up in an event draft pack, but not really optimal for me. Forge Complex. This card's been around for a long time. This is a card for the long play. This is a card for a lot of decks that want lots of late game options. And you may not get great late game options, but if you play this on curve, Vulcan, it used to be Magnus. I've seen Kurzes use it. Warlords who can last a long time and maybe aren't using a lot of troops on their end, or who just don't have enough power, enough longevity in the troops that they have in their deck. The Forge Complex can continuously give you Mechanicum troops, and that there's no cost limit. It could give you pump out Neuro, Scythe, Antar, Doombringer, Mechanicum Squad, which is just still a beefy 8/7, Coriel Zeth. These are all beefy stuff. Or 3 turns in a row, you could get Servo Automata. It could be a little frustrating, but if you're playing that game, if you're playing a deck where you're going to go with a distance, you've got a lot of healing, you've got a lot of frontline, you're just drawing the game out. Mortarion makes a good use of this card too, if he's not Rain Death Trap. This is a great way to give you a lot of troops. And even then, if you're dropping 2 or 3 low-cost troops on the board, it's stuff that your opponent has to deal with. Late game, that's not too bad. And every turn you're going to get stuff. You will have options. Now, this works against you if you have a lot of stuff that you're not playing in your hand, because your hand will fill up fast. This works against you if you're playing against like Alpha Legion. It's not something that you want to play. But it is a very powerful tool, because there is nothing nicer than your opponent is playing a stealth faction or a stealth warlord, and you've got your Forge Complex spaying out Sagittarii Protectors and Arcadias or Doombringers. Things like that where it's like, okay, that's great. Or you're playing against a Death Guard and you're getting Chimu. Like, it's the whole random generation. You don't know what you're going to get. You could get good, you could get bad, but if you're playing that game, it's worth including. Just be careful when you play it. Gamma Psi 24. I like the art, and that's about it. This doesn't have a whole lot going for me. If I play this, it's because it just generated from a Forge complex. Gamma Theta 11, on the other hand, is something that I do like because this is some strong frontline. 3-4 frontline for 5 doesn't seem great, but on your opponent's turn, this is a 6-4, which means it cannot be Melgatored. It also means for things like Tacitus Proctor, it's going to get stronger every turn. Other factions, I said Atesh Tarsa earlier. Atesh Tarsa loves giving Survivor to those guys, and, because your opponent is kind of daunted. It's a 6 attack. I don't want to attack a 6 with my face. If I throw a flanker into it, usually that's going to kill the flanking troop, and maybe it's worth it, but your opponent might wait a turn. They might not. I mean, if they're smart, they don't, but at the very least, it buys you time. This is actually a fairly decent frontline troop for the cost and for what it does, especially if you can support it. If you can't support it by increasing its stats or by giving it some other means of protection, it won't do as much for you, but if you can just give it just a midge, just a little tiny bit of support, this thing can go the distance. Chiari Dominator. This is also one of those cards I just don't see unless I'm getting the Forge Complex creation for it, but its ability is actually pretty nice. For 4 energy, it destroys an enemy vehicle. This is not something that your opponent wants to have sitting around, especially if they're running a lot of vehicles. For 4, it's a hard removal. I'll just destroy that. Get out of here. Or if I'm not destroying a vehicle, I'm punching you for 6. It's not bad. It just isn't something I put in my deck. Romu 31. A long time back, this also used to be a pretty good card. It had the Backlash Destroy Random Enemy Vehicle. There's a lot less inclusions of these. Again, its stats are very easy for it to be bounced or dealt with. And your opponent, if they don't have any vehicles on the board, can deal with this fairly easily before they play a vehicle. It still has a spot in a couple of decks. I really would pressure you not to include it. I'd rather you run just hard removal for 5, honestly. 3-4 stats are not great for 5, but 5 is your average cost for hard removal in faction. So why not just have a hard removal tactic that can deal with anything, not just vehicles, and not randomly? It depends on the faction, obviously, but my point is, I feel like this card is kind of aged significantly at this point. It's not worth including. I wouldn't recommend picking up at the shop. There's better cards out there. Sagittarii Hoplights. Rally, if you've got a vehicle to get frontline, that's cool, but they're a 4 attack, so they're Melgator range. But because you've got Mechanicum synergy, they could be stronger. If you're buffing them with other things, they could be stronger. They're just not what I want at 5. If I'm playing 5, I want a frontline. I'm going to go right to the Sagittarii Protector. And I know I'm skipping over one card here, but this is just the best 5-cost Mechanicum troop. Like, you could argue it with the next one. We'll go to the next one. But, I mean, I just feel like this is just 4-5 frontline. Good rally. A random enemy with stealth loses it. That's very nice. That's not something that if your opponent has got a stealth in their stuff that they want to get back to you. If they don't, they have a 5 health frontline that they have to deal with. This is just a good frontline troop. Now, the other 5-cost troop is the Sigmaphi, which is a 5-4, no frontline, but it jams an enemy troop, and that's pretty good too. I just give it up to the Sagittarii Protector because it's got that frontline, but neither of these are bad choices, and both of these are very good choices for neutrals, because if you find you need frontline, great. You need stealth hate, great. Sagittarii Protector's your boy. If you're finding yourself just getting tired of enemy troops that have got over stats and buffs and you want something with a little bit punch, maybe you're running an infantry deck, boom, Sigmaphi, he's your boy. Do it. Both of these, very good. Neither of these are bad. They don't go in every deck, but there's something that you should consider for most decks, especially if you don't have a big collection. These are really good tools. Oh, man, all this Mechanicum is drying my throat out. The flesh is weak indeed. Alpha Omega 05, pass. 8 attack, wow. 4 health, not wow. So much, not wow. No game text, pass. Don't play this card. If this card is generated, whatever, that's fine, but don't put this in your deck. Chimu is good to put in your deck. It's a 5/5. Heals 2/2 adjacent units and removes poison. And that's really nice because there's only a few units that remove poison. There's only a few ways to remove poison. And there's nothing worse than having a big stat pumped up troop get poisoned. And this way you can heal them and remove that poison. And get a 5/5 body on the board to boot. So that's a good card. That's a good card to have. Does it go in every deck? No. But, as I said, time and time again, consider it if it's right for you or if you're having those matchups. Edicappa 00 combat robot. Nice 8/7 body for 6. Cool. A long time ago, he used to be relentless. They changed this to resolution, and he got a lot better as a result of it. As long as you don't have, as long as you've got another troop on the board, when you play him, you don't have to worry about him being stunned at the start of your next turn. Now your opponent has got to deal with his big 8/7 body that maybe you're going to drop Forbidden Protocols on or some other boost on or just make a nasty boy. Now at 6 energy, there's a lot of things now at this point in the game that can flank or deal with it. It's not as it's not broken, it's not unbeatable, but it is formidable. And that's something to keep in mind. And then just the next turn, follow it up, play another troop, and this strong boy keeps going for you. Very cool card. Works in a lot of decks. Even decks that might get stunned by. Mortarians used to use this all the time before they drop their Death Shroud, drop an Edicappa, and then use Mortarian's ability to remove the stun. Oh, you thought he's stunned? No, he's not. And now he will attack for 8. So yeah, that's pretty good. I don't have Forgemaster. He's the one legendary from this faction that I'm missing. I really would like to have Forgemaster. 6/6 for shield, for 6 energy, and then for 5 energy, I can just choose a Mechanicum trip and put it in play. Seems like a win. It's high cost. 5 energy, and then what if my choices are Delta, Omega, Pi Alpha, and Sagittarii Peltest? I'd be a little pissed. I'd put in the Delta Omega because it costs 5. But if my choices for 5 energy are Doombringer, Coriel, Zeth, and the Abominable Intelligence, oh yeah, I'm going to do it. So, and then on top of that, you got a 6/6 with shield. Seems like a good card. I wish I had one so I could play and tell you for sure how it actually works in practice. In theory, on paper, it looks good. When it comes up in the shop, I can tell you I'm going to get it because I need it. I can't tell you if it's something that you should get, but if you want to try it or if you're playing Mechanicum troops in general, it seems like a good card to have. Ospecs. Woo! That's the last of my water. My goodness. Ospecs is overcosted for what it does. I'm going to say it. I like the text. Return a troop to hand. This is what Ambassador Melgator used to do. He used to return troops to hand. It could be yours. It could be the enemy's. There was no cost. There was no type. It didn't matter if it was a demon. It didn't matter if it was a structure. If it was a vehicle, he could bounce it. He cost 2. He's legendary. He's been changed. This costs 6. It feels like a very conservative effort by every guild to avoid having the meta shaped by people running multiple Auspexes, and therefore nobody runs high-cost troops in their decks anymore. And that was a big problem with Melgator, because it was like, why run all these high-cost troops? Because your opponent can just bounce them right back to your hand with the one card. But I feel like if Auspex cost 4 or 5, not 3, definitely, 4 is arguable, 5 feels more fair, that this would be a slightly better and a little bit more attractive. 6 is just too expensive for what this does. Whether it's you're bouncing yours or the others, this is just too much energy to do that with. However, that being said, it is the closest thing that the neutrals have to hard removal. It's temporary removal, is a one-turn bounce. This costs 6. The Imperial Army Eratan cost 5, which is also, again, the closest thing that they have to hard removal. Stunning and dealing a lot of damage to one unit. It's not great, but if you give a neutral hard removal out there to the game, then suddenly every faction has hard removal, and that's overpowered. So it's hard to balance what this card does, but as it is right now, it just is overcosted, and nobody's playing this card. I wouldn't recommend getting this card. I got it because I have to complete my collection, but I have not played it, nor am I worried about playing it at this point. I'm not going to pay 6 to bounce one troop when there are other cards that let me deal with that more effectively, either through hard removal, direct damage, flanking, or anything. This just doesn't do anything else for me. Macrotech Engines here. I talked a little bit about him with Proctor in terms of having a board full of vehicles, and then they all get shield. That's a pretty nice ability, and you get a 5-6 body on top of it. But if you're not running a lot of vehicles, then this is not a troop for you. It's a common, so that's fine. You're not missing anything. It's a great rally if you have a lot of vehicles in your deck or you're playing a vehicle-heavy board. But he's not going to make the same impact with the White Scars as he would attack it as Proctor. For the simple fact that White Scars vehicles are fast, and they come out and you might only have one, maybe 2 on the board, and they have low health, so they're not going to stick around. Whereas other decks that are building up vehicles that have got energy use abilities or relentless resolution abilities, this is a great way to protect them. I wouldn't put 2 of in a deck, just have it as a 1 of. You drop 3 or 4 shields on your board, your opponent takes notice. Photon Thruster is... if it gets generated by Forge Complex, I'll put it out there. If I play it in events, I've had it in some draft effects where it can actually be pretty board controlling, but events are a different shape altogether because removal is a little bit more limited in some ways. But 2 energy, jam, and deal 4 damage to a random enemy troop. That's not a bad ability. It's just that 3 attack is kind of low. Also, it doesn't do anything against Warlords. So if your opponent doesn't have any troops, you really don't have any choice except to use that 3 attack. On the plus side, it has 7 health, but it's not that great. A Remier is also an aged creature. You still see them occasionally. I don't know if that's just because some people don't have better cards or because people are trying new things. This 3 health in stealth is really what holds it back. High attack of 7. Sneak attack, which is great because once it attacks for 7, it's going to stick on the board. Now your opponent's got to deal with that 7. They very easily can because it's got 3 health. But the Battle Honor returns it to your hand. So at the very least, it's kind of like a little, it basically is a Tech Boost Assassin. Pops out of the shadows, kills a high-cost card, goes back in your hand, you drop it down, and you play it again. If you can give this more health, Fabius Bile, Atesh Tarsa, any sort of troop buffs, great. You can keep it going. It can stay a little bit longer. It's really deadly if you're attacking the enemy Warlord with a 8 or 9 attack sneak attack card. That draws a lot of heat. That draws a lot of fire. But the setup is so vulnerable. 3 health is susceptible to Joker companies. It's really likely going to get vaped by defensive satellites or volcanic instability. It's very fragile. I think if this were to get changed to a 6/4 with the same ability for 6, I'd be okay with it. You might still live a little bit longer with that 4 health. That 4 health makes a big difference. I've talked about Tagmata formation enough, I think, between this video and the last video. But I'm going to clarify, or I guess I'll reiterate, Tagmata formation is the Mechanicum version of Ornitov's Barge, but the troops that it creates don't have front line, except for 1. And really, you don't play it unless you're playing it with something that can synergize with it, such as Death of Innocence. There are a couple other cards that can make use of having multiple infantry on the board. There are, but they're not as nice as having 2 Death of Innocence procced, play Tagmata formation, multiple Marks of Chaos on your Mechanicum troops. So, that being said, it's not a deck card that you put in everything, but if you want to build that deck, you should definitely have at least one of these in your deck. 2 feels like overkill sometimes, because some matchups you're just only going to see like 2 troops on the board, and 2 troops for 6 energy is not a good value. But it is a build. It is a nice tool for a specific build. Thalix Cohort is some more stealth hate here. Unstoppable, and then there's Relentless. A random enemy with stealth loses it, and then you've got a 4/6 on the board. Not bad. It's a little high cost, but again, it's got a nice thick 6 health going on for it. It's okay if I get it generated with the Forge Complex. I have no problem popping that thing out there because that 6 health is going to stick around, and that Relentless kind of draws your opponent's attention. But I don't put it in my decks. I wouldn't recommend putting this in your deck. You're better off as for 6 energy, honestly. Edicappa, Chimu, those are probably your best. Forgemaster very well could be. Remare if your build is that way. In terms of your best 6-cost troops, I really have to say Chimu is probably never going to steer you wrong. It's going to heal you, give you a 5/5, remove poison. That covers a lot of stuff. Forgemaster could be very good. I wish I had him, I could tell you. At your 5 cost, your best troops, in my opinion, it's a hard call between Sigmaphi and Sagittarii Protector. These guys are neck and neck. These guys are just really good. It's not bad for Gamma. Theta 11, that's not a bad troop. Secretary Hoplights has a place, but I can't say it's above these guys at all. I can't. At the 4 cost, there's just good stuff at the 4 cost, right? We've got Alpha Theta, we've got Epsilon Row, we've got Laz Taul, Sagittarii Squad, Voraxx. It's hard to say. They're all really good. I would argue that the 4 energy cost is the sweet spot for the Mechanicum faction, especially. There's just some really good stuff there. And at 3 energy, as far as troops go, Dark Tech Adept, Pi Alpha 52, Sibilans, probably in that order. Cards in general, within this range that it costs 3, that must-haves, Forbidden Protocols, Asteroid Belt, and I would probably say Voraxx and Sagittarii Protector. And I say those because those are epics for the most part in the legendary. Those are one. Last Tool is another one just for Mechanicum build. So if you know what to look for in the shop, you can pick those up there. All right, so that's part 2. Part 3, we're going to do 7 cost through 10 cost. I'm going to get some water in my throat and dry my vocal cords, and we'll keep grinding out here. I put in some bionics, upgrade myself with maybe some cognitive functions. Maybe get myself a little cybernetic cortex going back in there. We'll be able to process some things at faster data speed. That's it for me, guys. If you like this video, please like it. Please recommend it. If you know somebody who's got questions about the Mechanicum card pool or the faction or the card game in general, please recommend the channel, pass on the word, subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. And we'll see you guys next time. Until then, keep playing Legions. Bye.